Hi, everybody. Welcome to Ballpark Figures. Super excited to have you all here for, I believe this is our fourth installment. Tonight's guest is Mina Kimes. She's an award-winning journalist, analyst, podcast host, and television contributor for ESPN since 2014. She's a highly acclaimed football analyst and appears regularly on NFL Live, SportsCenter, Around the Horn, and other TV programs across the network. In addition, she hosts the Mina Kimes Show featuring Lenny podcast and was the original host for the ESPN Daily podcast. In 2017, her ESPN The Magazine article, The Art of Letting Go, on bat flips in the Korea Baseball Organization won a SABR Analytics Conference Research Award for Best Historical Analysis or Commentary. And as you all know, I'm Shakeia, your host. Hi, Mina.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Really, really glad to have you here. I know that you are a Seattle sports fan. So we're a big baseball group here. So you talk to us about the Mariners. Are you excited about the Mariners? Are you enjoying the Mariners so far?
Yeah, well, I should first say the Mariner, I'm an NFL analyst. I'd say baseball fan. Obviously, I wrote a story about baseball, talk about baseball and Around the Horn, but football is my expertise. But that said, as much as I love the Seahawks, the Mariners were my first love. My favorite Seattle sports figure of all time, got right here, Edgar.
Yes.
Hanging out. Maybe favorite Seattle person of all time too. Just wonderful, wonderful human being. So yeah, I've been a Mariners fan since I was very, very young. All of my earliest memories going to the Kingdome. And, you know, every now and then I kind of like fall in and out of how much I've got invested. I think I may have emotionally invested a little too much ahead of this season. But, you know, early signs are good. Coming off of a tough losing streak, but bad week. I think they're playing the Rays tonight. I don't know if it started yet, but it's exciting to kind of see the fruits of some of those bad years, some of the really exciting young players I've really enjoyed watching. Yeah, so it's a fun time. It's still very early, obviously, but there are things to be excited about and anxious about, I think, with this particular squad. But I am enjoying it a lot this year.
I am a closet Mariners fan. Like, I'm
Really?
from Ohio. Yeah, I mean, I'm from Ohio, but I'm like the biggest Ken Griffey Jr. fan. And I also really, really love the Mariners uniforms. So I jump on the bandwagon real tough. I tell people on Twitter all the time, like, can I be on the Mariners bandwagon if they're good? And they've all been very welcoming. So, you know, go M's.
I think there's a implicit acknowledgement of the fact that, like, if you've rooted for the Mariners anytime in the last 20 years, it's not a bandwagon. You're just inflicting pain upon yourself. But yeah, I also think a lot of people my age in their mid-30s grew up as Mariners fans because of Ken Griffey Jr., you know, and you know, I was lured into rooting for the team, or not, obviously it was from Seattle, but you know, all of those incredibly fun and exciting teams were when I was like 8, 9, 10, 11, which I think is peak full baseball indoctrination age. So I don't think you're alone in loving those teams.
I know I'm not. I mean, people send me things from Seattle. I'm starting to think Seattle fans are my faves. You know, hopefully none of my hometown fans are listening. So you wrote this amazing, amazing article about your trip and KBO and bat flips. And what was that like?
It was an incredible experience. You know, I didn't really know what to expect when I was the assignment was actually not at all what the article ended up being. You know, a design editor, Chin Wang at ESPN, I think some designer had mentioned to her, oh, these Korean bat flips are really cool looking. Maybe you guys should just look into them. I can't remember the exact origin of the idea. So she came to me and said, you know, would you be interested in writing about these? And I thought, yeah, you know, I've obviously had seen them at that point because so many had gone viral in the US. This was like 2016, if I remember correctly, pardon me. And it was after the infamous Jose Bautista bat flip. So it felt kind of timely to kind of examine it. But what I didn't expect was that when I would reach out to Korean baseball writers or just Koreans that I knew, who like baseball, being Korean American myself, none of them had any idea why they were a thing in Korea or who started it or what made it okay there. As I wrote in the piece, Korea is a country very well known for decorum and tradition of its own in its own way, but here was this thing that was so violently in defiance of what the, of course, unwritten rules were in America. So I think that the sort of realization that launched me on my trip to Korea with my friend and the wonderful artist who did the artwork for the project, Mickey Duzage, was just the kind of mystery of it all. I think most of my favorite features I've written have been sort of mysteries. And luckily I work for ESPN where they're willing to send me to Korea to solve a mystery. I understand a lot of privilege there as a journalist, but it ended up being just an incredible experience. It's kind of one thing led to another. And I learned not only more about bat flips, but also about the history of baseball in Korea and what it meant to the country culturally, politically, socially as well.
It was, I don't have very much experience with KBO at all, other than what I've seen on TV. So like you painted this just great picture of like fans in the stands and they're soaking wet and there's all this like fanfare. And was it kind of a culture shock? Like based on how, American baseball is very buttoned up and you go there and everyone is like wilding out.
Yeah. So I've been to Korea before a lot of times to see my family and actually to do a couple of maybe one other piece at that time for ESPN about esports, but I'd never been to a Korean baseball game. To me, what was most shocking about kind of the atmosphere was it felt, and I think particularly I had the good fortune of going to my first game in Busan, which has maybe the rowdiest, funnest fan base and is an incredible experience. If you guys ever go to Korea, it's a kind of like the LA of Korea. It's on the southern tip of the country. Was that it kind of felt like a college football game. Just,
okay.
A lot of it is in the story, but everything from, each player having their own fan dance and cheer to there being this like, cheer squad with a cheermaster and just people going nuts every time, and to all the like the very fun things, that I saw that teams were doing during the games for their fans, which included, as you alluded to, a mascot with a giant water hose spraying all of us, which I don't know how that would fly. But also I would say the fan base itself, which was, just kind of young. I had never seen so many 20 somethings at a baseball game in my life. So it was, I think, and the reason, one of the journalists I spoke to, Daniel Kim, I believe, before I went to Korea, was like, you're not going to understand the bat flip thing until you come to a game. And that was sort of, it kind of helped me ultimately understand a big part of reason why Korean baseball players felt comfortable flipping their bats, even though they did not admit it to me for the first like 5 days of my trip.
Were you a fan of bat flips before you went on this great bat flip expedition?
Who isn't? I don't like, yes, I don't know. I feel like bat flips are one of those things like if you actually, maybe they have pulled fans. I feel like 90% of fans like them. And the other 10% are maybe like retired baseball players. The funny thing about, I would say, in American baseball, people always ask me kind of why does the lack of tolerance for this person, although I would argue it's gotten since the Bautista thing has actually declined a little bit, people have gotten a little bit more comfortable with it, or the unwritten rules in general. And I think what's something that non-baseball fans are always surprised to hear is that it's not, fans aren't really the ones policing most of these things. It's the players themselves and even young players. And I think, so I would, as a fan, absolutely loved it. And I think part of the things I wanted to look into is, why is this so acceptable in Korea as a means of kind of understanding how it might become acceptable in America?
That is something that I've been, even in reading your piece, I even was putting together my questions, like, what would it take for something like that to become acceptable here? Like, I personally enjoy a good bat flip. I am totally fine when players are like, chirping at each other, as long as, there's nothing too bad happening. And I think the unwritten rules are a little dated at this point. You mentioned in the article something that I thought was really cool, and that's if a pitcher buzzes an older hitter, they take off their hat and bow. That is, I think first that would be kind of funny here because we would all be a little confused, but that's such a flip as that on unwritten rules, whereas the ones here typically are violent, right? Like,
Yeah.
were there other unwritten rules that you came across there that just are completely different from here?
Most of it was just kind of stuff that reflected Korean society at large, which is a lot of it had, or I would say, were rooted in a lot of the rules. Respect for your elders, which is a very, very fundamental part of Korean culture, and translated into the diamond and teams and how older players are treated and revered. But something that I remembered that was really interesting to me while reporting the piece, not in terms of understanding why they did it, which was kind of the central mystery, but why everybody was so okay with it. Well, one of the reasons why everyone was so okay with it had to do with why they did it, which we can get to, but and the history of it. But one of the other reasons was that Korean baseball is small. A lot of the players talked about how the league is smaller, obviously, than the United States, but also the vast majority of them grew up playing high school baseball together. High school baseball is very, very important in Korea. The little league teams, you guys, I'm sure, see it. The World Series always make it really, really far. It's really competitive, but it's kind of like a small community. So guys were like, I'm not going to hit my friend because he like celebrates. It's stupid, and
Right.
I'm not going to like try to hurt someone by sliding into them like a moron, so there was that kind of convivial aspect to it that I also found really lovely, but obviously is not as easy to reproduce over here.
I wish it were like the joy in the music and the dancing and the backflips. And do you find that both home fans and visiting fans alike are all like, I don't know, excited?
Yeah, I mean, you would even see visiting fans doing the dances and stuff without the music backing and stuff. But and they bring their own cheer squad, by the way.
What?
Yeah, I did. I think fan culture is just really, really important there. And it's I don't know how you kind of get to the point where you get there with the US. I think there are things certainly that Major League Baseball has tried to do to get to attract, or I guess change the atmosphere and make it fun. But it feels like in Korea it's kind of always been that way.
You mentioned for a second there, like the history of the game and it being important there. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? Like, what exactly are you referring to? Because some of us don't know.
Yeah, so this was kind of like the central mystery at the core of my piece, which is, okay, how did this start, right? Because when I first started interviewing players, they would all tell me, I interviewed quite a few players, and they would say, it just naturally happens. It's just like, we just, or there was like, oh, we're smaller. So, and I'm like, I just watched batting practice and none of you did it. So it's clearly not, reflex. And also Korean players, by the way, hit for more power than Japanese a lot of times. So like, you don't see Japanese players doing it. And then I talked to a scout with Lotte who told me, yeah, like they're not going to tell an American about anything about this. And I kind of had a revelation that they had the perception that it was like, they would call it a crime in America when they talked to me, and they thought they were being mocked. And when I told them, no, Americans love these, they were all universally shocked. So there was this perception that the thing that was natural to them, or fun for them rather, was seen as really disrespectful in America. So they were kind of a little bit wary of talking about it. A lot of them didn't know it was even perceived as bad or unprofessional or whatever until American players started coming to Korea and like telling them. Or you had guys like Chano Park, who's in the piece, who went to America, never played in the KBO, and came back and was like, what the hell are you guys doing? Like, you can't do this.
Right.
And we're like, we literally all do this. So I was a little bit at a loss until it was a little league coach. So then I went to Little League, which was really fun because all the kids were just doing it. And like, yeah, we're like, it's like, this player, that player. And then their coach was like telling me a lot about, he's like, well, you have to really understand the history of the game. And the first guy who ever did it is this guy, Yang Jun-hyuk, if I'm saying his name right by memory, who was like a very famous former slugger in Korea. So I went about finding him, and he had like a little foundation in Gangnam. And he kind of told me the whole story, which is, well, he didn't tell me the whole story about the history of Korean baseball, but I learned about it afterwards, which was, not obviously for a lot of people aren't familiar with the entirety of Korean history. It was occupied by Japan for a long time. And during the Japanese occupation, they were actually, some of the sports they played, like soccer, and basketball, the Japanese occupiers had them say, no, we play baseball now. You play baseball now. So it was actually an act of intrusion and something,
wow.
they didn't want to do at first. And so they were kind of like, we're going to find tiny ways to rebel inside the game a little bit. But then even when the KBO was launched, I believe in 1980, which is the Korean baseball organization, there was still a very large Japanese presence, a lot of the coaches, and then the Koreans were like, all right, they have their sport. How can we kind of make it our sport? Because we've become independent from them as a people. And Yang Jun-hyuk, who's this like gigantic dude, was the first person to be like, he would flip his bat and make like a touchdown sign. And people did not love it at first. He said they would throw like ramen at him, and the coaches hated him. But he was so good that it was kind of undeniable.
Mm-hmm.
Either people thought, oh, maybe it helps, or like, who are we to say this guy he was just too good, ton of records, all of that. And so after he started doing it, kind of a few other players started doing it. And then in the 80s and the 90s, it just kind of became canon that it was acceptable. And not only acceptable, but part of Korean baseball. And this was also when the Korean baseball teams started beating Japanese teams in international competition. And then ultimately in the 2008 Olympics, I think in the semis, when they won their first gold. And that was such a point of national pride for Korea because of the history of colonization, that, all of the baseball culture became very distinctly Korean and something that they were extremely proud of.
I love that. That actually makes me love bat flips even more. It's like an act of rebellion. Like, I really love that. And it kind of is that here, I guess. Like, Jazz Chisholm plays for the Marlins, and he's always being asked about, like, he's having a good time and how it upsets people. And he's like, well, we don't do things like that anymore. That's amazing. Do you have a bat flip in history that you recall, like maybe like recent time that like you were excited about?
Well, I mean, recently JP Crawford on my Mariners had a really nice one. You guys can look. I think like a few weeks ago. That comes to mind. I think didn't Alonso have one? I think at the beginning of the year that was pretty great. And I don't think and they're pretty. We're not really. It seems like pitchers aren't as angry because they're like, they know that it's extremely nerdy to be mad at. So,
Yeah,
not
maybe
that
that's what we should
other
do.
stupid things aren't happening in baseball, but the stigma on that seems to have dropped a little bit. Some of the Korean ones though are incredible. Just 50 feet in the air, the just incredible pimping of it is amazing.
I personally would love that here. Like, if someone hit a home run, right, and they throw their arms up as if they're signaling a touchdown, I think I would stand on my feet, whether I was at home or at the ballpark, and just absolutely lose it. For some reason, I don't know what it is, but like arrogance to a certain degree is so funny to me. Like, yes, pimp the home run. One of my favorite audacious baseball moments is Barry Bonds and the pirouette. Like, you can't come back from that. A guy pirouettes on you, you gotta just have a seat. Like,
Exactly.
Why do you think baseball has more international appeal than football? Or does it?
I can't speak for the numbers right now. Obviously, baseball has more international players than football. But I think each of the countries that are feeders or countries where a lot of people play baseball in South and Central America and then Asia, there are rich histories like the one I just described in Korea,
Mhm.
you know, in Japan. Actually, I think, by the way, now that I remember it, in Korea, baseball was not brought by the Japanese. It was actually brought by an American YMCA, like a missionary. Yeah, but the Japanese really kind of popularized it. But
Okay.
you know, I think, though, per our conversation about bat flips and just sort of acts of exuberance generally in the sport, you know, there's undeniably a racial or foreign component to it. I can't speak for bat flips in particular in Latin America, but you know, you hear all the time players from other countries speak about having to temper. Certainly, Bautista spoke about this at the time. I remember having to temper some of their enjoyment of the game, frankly,
Mhm.
the flair they brought to it, in order to sort of abide by the unwritten rules. And I really do think that's a shame because, you know, because it is such an international sport, I think part of what makes it great is the diversity of the talent pool. And I think having players from all of these countries bring their traditions to the sport and you know, make it better is what ultimately will allow it to grow.
Agree. I agree. I mean, you obviously can tell I'm just ready for any kind of dramatics, any signs of joy, any ridiculousness in a game. I've been joking on Twitter that we need an R&B night in MLB where everyone walks up to a slow song
That's a
just
great
because
idea.
I thank you. I just think we need more moments of like it's adults playing a kid's game. It's not to be taken super seriously. I get upset about the taunting rule in the NFL. So, you know, I'm always going to be like, let people react, let people celebrate that they did something fun or cool. It's a sport that most of us cannot play. Like,
Yeah, and you know, the one about baseball that always gets me is, you know, obviously the unwritten rules, a lot of it is about celebrating on for both pitchers and batters and whatever, doing different things, but also how anti-competitive some of them are, which I think has been something that's come up a few times this season. You know, players outrageously trying to win late in games. I think it was Gabe Kapler, right, who was like, this is stupid. Like, we want to win. Teams come back. I can't believe that's still a thing, candidly. Like, I don't understand, yeah, that sort of perceived disrespect of another. If anything, it should be more respectful of another team's trying to run up the score because they're afraid of you coming back. And I don't
right.
understand. I kind of find that like, wow, like, aren't you guys like the best athletes in the world and like incredibly competitive? I don't know. So that one's really puzzling to me.
But extremely sensitive, extremely sensitive. Like,
Oh,
it does not jive. It doesn't make any sense at all. So this is more of a question about how you approach your work as opposed to baseball. Um, TV work versus print work. Like, how do you approach it? What are you doing differently?
well, so my job is really different now because at ESPN, I was a features writer primarily, and wrote about like a wide variety of sports from, you know, football to I got to travel. Got to go to Spain and interview Luka Doncic before he came to the NBA. Got to go to the Olympics in Brazil. As I mentioned, I went to Japan to write about esports, which is one of my favorite stories, or probably Korea, pardon me, my favorite stories I've ever done. But you know, I was spending months and months working on these stories, reporting them, structuring them, writing them, all of that. And now my job is mostly just give my opinions about football on TV. I do think that and not just football, but primarily football, you know, there's a bit of a through line though between those two jobs because, you know, they really are both ultimately kind of the same, which is, or I would say the work that underlies them is the same, which is gathering information and synthesizing it and trying to communicate it in a compelling way. Um, you know, I think something like Korean bat flips, you know, it's like, okay, I'm going to spend 10 days reporting this. I'm going to gather everything. And then I'm going to spend a lot of time thinking about how to make people care about it and how to be interested about it. And weirdly, like the same thing goes into like a 2-minute clip about, I don't know, the Eagles draft. You know, I get all the information, I think about it, I stare at a wall, and then I say, all right, this is how I'm going to communicate it to people to make it interesting. So obviously it's very different. a lot more makeup is involved in my job now, but the clothing is much more uncomfortable. But the work there's a lot of similarities that I think people don't appreciate sometimes.
Okay. I watched you during the draft. I am a Bears fan, and your face just now.
There's that for Justin Fields.
It's tough times over here, okay? But I watched you during the draft, and I'm always like so impressed with how effortless you make it look. Like just, and I love following you on social, and you shut down guys. I'm always cheering for that. Like, yes, get them, girl. So
that's a lack of impulse control. Don't cheer me on.
No, yes. Well, I try not to respond, so it's always nice when I see other people doing it. Yeah. I'm gonna let other people ask you questions. Let's see what we have in the chat here. Steve wants to know, are any acts in Korean baseball seen as not acceptable, like doing an ultra slow trot around the bases after a home run?
I didn't encounter anything in the way of celebration. The ones that constantly were brought up to me were just honestly, and maybe I'm missing some, any disrespecting your elders. And that includes, by the way, your manager, I would say. Mm-hmm. There is still, so, I know I've made Korean baseball sound like this paradise of fun and really good food and dancing, but something that players have told me or did tell me that, the strict hierarchy of management and sort of when it come to age and generally isn't always great for them. And I think that's something that I've also heard about from players in Japan who have played in Japan as well, something that they had to adjust to and didn't love.
Andrew would like to know, what can we change in the US to incorporate the spontaneous excitement in other countries?
But, it's so tricky, right? Because if it was the league or like outsiders enforcing these rules or sort of this anti-celebratory culture at times, I think it would be a lot easier. Like, hey, baseball, stop it. But baseball, they'll put out like the 10 top bat flips of 2021. Like they're let the kids play. Like they want more of this. And it really is, like I said, player and occasionally manager, depending on your team, enforced. I think perhaps celebrating those players who do who are willing to have a little bit of swag and do fun things is probably the best way to encourage other players to do it. If I don't know, like I remember when Bryce Harper was on the cover of everything, right? Because he was kind of swaggy, like things like that, marketing, attention generally. But it's a hard thing to change when it's like 20 somethings who are still abiding by rules that have been around for decades and decades.
Woody is asking, can you talk a bit more about the difference between US and Korean fans?
So I would say demographics for me was something I noticed. I kind of alluded to this earlier, but the demographics of Korean baseball games, the fans, it did feel a little bit more like college football. Not just kids, but like teenagers and people in their 20s, which was a little bit, I had no idea until I went. I think, I can't remember who was in the piece, but someone told me that it's like a place where, in a sort of buttoned up society, certainly a buttoned up workforce, it was, baseball games were a place where like everybody felt like they could kind of release and be themselves and be loud and dance. And I thought that was really special. I think it's kind of one of those things where the culture attracts the fan base and the fan base perpetuates the culture, if that makes sense. If you throw kind of a younger crowd or a crowd that is drawn to these sorts of events and going to a game where they have this thing called mekju. I don't know. It's like, so instead of like a hot dog, it's like a box of fried chicken and beer that everyone gets at games. I mean, who doesn't want that?
That sounds incredible.
Korean fried chicken. yeah, it's just kind of like a party atmosphere, but they love baseball too. Like they're all really, oh, he's this and that, everybody's like a super studious fan too. Which I guess you could say the same about college football in America.
So are there stadium cues?
Yes, a lot.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Like, I think I mentioned this in the piece, like at one of the games, instead of like a, I don't know, a little race or whatever, like trying to think of things that fans do, the cap thing or the trivia, they had, like a miniature American Idol type thing where they were just constantly finding fans were coming up and getting a chance to compete between at bats and sing. So, which we love singing, we Koreans. And I think there's a lot of things like that going on throughout the game. Really didn't love being rained on though. I will admit that.
Okay.
Yeah, not.
What kind of singing? Like, what kind of songs were they singing? Like, were they like straight up going like karaoke?
Yeah,
style?
full on. Yeah.
Oh.
Dancing, stuff like that.
Oh, I'm kind of into that. I can't sing, but I know what my song would be. Mark is asking, does the respect for elders culture make it more difficult in Korea for a younger player trying to beat out a declining older player for playing time or for a starting position?
So that was a complaint I did hear a couple of times. I would say I haven't like reported on it to know how common it is or justifiable, but that is definitely something that came up with like regards to decision making, deference, things that we see to a lesser degree in various sports here in America. But yeah, it is, at least I would say was, especially a lot of them talked about it in the past tense. I think Korean teams, and I mentioned this in the piece, there's a modernization aspect from the constant conversation between Korean and American baseball that many felt have improved the sport in terms of health and training and approaches towards sports science and roster management, all that kind of thing, analytics. But that was something they felt like they were still kind of behind America in terms of the meritocratic nature of American baseball.
MLB's business model is very regionally structured, especially with its defined TV markets. Are there any lessons you think MLB could take from the NFL in terms of making the sport more broadly appealing?
Oh yeah, it's tough, right? Because it is obviously, and I think some of it comes down to, I mean, I'm not the first person to talk about the need for national stars and the ways to promote national stars. I mean, we started this out by talking about Ken Griffey Jr., who literally every child in America under the age of 12 was obsessed with and tried to mimic his swing and the way he wore his hat. And I think, obviously baseball has put a tremendous amount of effort into trying to promote national stars. But, I think a lot of it also is the media presentation of those stars. I would say like also just kind of, baseball is just such a wonderful experiential sport. Anything that can be done to make that experience more appealing to all demographics, obviously a younger one as well, can go a long way towards making people more excited about it on a national level, I think. And it's funny because I thought you were going to mention Korea rather than American football, because Korea, it's very much a national and not a regional sport, but Korea is obviously a much smaller country, which makes that a lot easier. Whereas I think with football, like, it's so hard to compare because of the small sample size of games. There's rather the small number of games. I think also the way in which fantasy football has, it's interesting because I think most of us grew up playing fantasy baseball and not fantasy football, but fantasy football has vaulted so many football players in markets where people would otherwise be familiar into the national consciousness. And I do wonder personally, it's not a good answer because I just ended with a question, but I wonder, with baseball, kind of how that kind of went away. I guess I haven't seen numbers on whether people play less fantasy baseball though.
You mentioned in your piece that in KBO, there's a limited number of foreign players allowed on the teams. So what is the general perception of American players joining KBO?
Oh, it's mostly fine. Yeah, they kind of take them under their wing. It's really cute. I mean, it's only 3, I think, if I remember correctly. Maybe that's changed since then. But there's like a whole. There are people who work on the teams who help. Korea is very, very far, and it's not the easiest place in the world to be if you don't. None of them speak the language, and culturally, I know that transition can be Can be difficult for them. But their success is really important to the team. So they all, at least not all, but many of them I've heard spend a lot of time really, really working to integrate the American players, and they all leave with like wonderful friendships.
Oh, that sounds so dope. Allison has a non-baseball question. She says, how do you prepare for a show like Around the Horn where it seems like you have to have a take on everything?
That's a great question. So the producer of Around the Horn, and pardon the interruption, gave me really great advice a long time ago when I think I asked them the same question, where I was like, I love basketball, but I'm not sure I have an opinion on every playoff series or whatever. And he was like, you don't have to have a take, just figure out what you find interesting, and then the take will come from there. And so for me, when it's a story, it's not just like, usually most of our stories aren't just like, who do you think are going to win, but they're rather like, what do you think of this controversy or whatever. I read it and I think about like, what is interesting to me about this? And that's not, that's not even like a take, but I think sometimes just saying, hey, this is the thing that really matters in this story, is actually more compelling than a take, because you're kind of guiding viewers or listeners into what to look for going forward.
Not many journalists and analysts wear their sports heart on their sleeve like you do with Seattle. How has that helped and or wait, do that again?
That's a Super Bowl tattoo.
Amazing. How has that helped and or hindered your work? Should more journalists do that?
I would say neither helped nor hindered. I think most well, first I'll put this way. When I was it's very different being a reporter from an analyst, right? Because when I was a reporter, like I wasn't writing about Seattle sports, like I was writing about Korean baseball and things like that. I do think, having a beat reporter who's a fan of a team is a little bit, I would imagine, kind of off-putting for readers. So as I was a features writer, so it's very different just because I wasn't writing about it. As an analyst, this is something I get asked a lot, especially as it pertains to the Seahawks, the football team, because I'm a football analyst. How does it prevent you from being biased, I guess? And I always say, there's a real difference between being a fan and a homer. A fan is just someone who's kind of honest about their rooting interests and transparent about them. And maybe that turns people off. I found it mostly doesn't. A homer is someone who says things that aren't true or believes things that aren't true. Who goes on TV and complains about calls or perception of their team. I would say, maybe this is actually a small hindrance. I feel like I'm more critical about the teams I root for. I don't think I'm doing it to dispel any sense of bias. I think I'm just critical generally, but I'm probably more critical of the Seahawks than most people, honestly.
Yeah.
I complain about them a lot. And one thing I found, just from a TV perspective, maybe this is true, I would say this is probably true of radio and podcasting as well, is sports fans really love watching and listening to people who they feel not only are like reasoned or smart, but also passionate. And I have found that people often want to hear my thoughts on Seahawks happenings because they know I'm passionate about it, even if I'm going to be very critical, which as of late I have been.
I couldn't do it. I won't write about any of the teams I root for, mostly because they all stink, but, but also because I am not very good at being impartial. Not the way you are. I would be like, well, fire everyone, get a whole new team. Why is Justin Fields not getting any love that I feel like I would just lose it. Let's see. Is there any story pertaining to MLB that you like to see people discuss more?
Gosh, I think baseball writing is so good. I read a ton of it. So I feel like I'm not a good person to point out things that are missing in baseball journalism, because I think it continues to be excellent. Especially, I feel like baseball journalism is certainly a far of football writing and football analysis in terms of the embrace of analytics, obviously, but also, you know, our knowledge of the sport has deepened so much. And I think a lot of really great baseball writers are good at presenting that in a super accessible fashion, which I really love. You know, I think along the same lines of how baseball is kind of regional from a TV audience perspective, I know that's true, obviously, of print as well, but I also constantly find myself reading excellent national stories on, what was I just reading the other day? I was reading I think this was an ESPN, no, was it ESPN, about the decline of offense this year and all the various reasons. Maybe it was The Athletic, so I don't want to put it.
It's actually been everywhere. It was in ESPN today,
okay.
The Athletic last week, Baseball Prospectus like the week before. It's a big deal.
I was reading it great. I thought the piece was so great. It was just going into like every possible angle, from the humidors to the weather. And I just think I just read so many great trend pieces that kind of transcend, well, here's what's the latest in our team. And I really love that. So I have to say, I don't think that much is missing from my perspective, but I'm sure there are more knowledgeable people than I who are seeing holes.
Here's a fun question. What would be your R&B night walk-up song?
Oh, God. Does Creep count?
Oh, okay. Yeah, of course it counts. It's slow enough. I think it's slow enough.
It's not a love song. I just like it. God, all the songs that are coming to mind are like sad and not good, like slow, not like positive slow jams.
Wait, what other songs are coming to mind?
I'm Going Down, one of my favorite songs.
Oh man, Mary J. Blige.
That's not. No one wants to hear that when you're going up to bed.
I mean, that's definitely a "You Struck Out" song for sure. Like,
yeah. Okay, maybe How Does It Feel? Does that work?
ooh, D'Angelo. They all work for me. Like, it's your song.
Okay, I'll go with that, because at least that's like positive. And then maybe they'll play
Okay.
the video at the ballpark, and then people get really uncomfortable.
They especially at ballparks here. I could see D'Angelo's abs on the
Picking up the whole
jumbotron.
jumbotron. That's
Yeah,
that's baseball I want.
sensual baseball. We need more of it. Let's see. Okay, Emily says this is probably a bit niche, but your favorite Mariners commercial of all time.
Oh, of course, Edgar. It's a light bat. Are we getting that right? The one where the bat is now someone in here correct me.
Yes, she said yes, Eagle.
Oh man.
I love that. That was a very special moment that most of us are like, what commercial? We got a football question if you want to answer a football question.
That's me.
All right. Why do people care about Baker Mayfield?
You know what? Maybe this is like something that baseball needs nationally. People care about him because he's divisive. I don't know. I mean, you can tell me about players who are on that level of inciting like national debate in terms of mixed perceptions, not only of their personality, but their abilities. And maybe that's harder with baseball because it's so much easier to quantify who's good and who's not. Whereas with quarterbacking, it's a little bit challenging because of all the confounding factors, you know. But I find that people are like, I'll tell you this little peek behind the curtain. Baker Mayfield clips on TV like do better because people want to be like, you know, we could all go on and say Patrick Mahomes is great for 10 minutes. It's true. Or you could have a bunch of people saying, well, what about this, you know, Baker Mayfield game? Actually, you know, and I think there's something about that when it comes to sports television. I know people don't like screaming shows, and I hear that a lot, but people do like spirited discussion. They like feeling like they're in the bar or the barbershop or whatever. And he is just one of those topics that seems to bring it about.
I think sports people, as much as they don't want to admit it, they like the perceived villain. Like,
Harper's,
you know, they like the person to who everyone's talking about. Who is an underrated writer we should be reading or following on social media?
Oh gosh. a baseball or football or anything, I guess. Anything.
I guess just generally, they didn't specify. I don't think Nick minds if you talk about he said anything.
Okay. Oh man, there's so many good ones. I'm trying to think of ones that are underrated. Um, I mean, I think Kevin Van Valkenburg, who covers all sports for us, I love everything he does. I find it really thoughtful as well. Dave Fleming too comes to mind. Um, Michael Sean Dugar, who covers the Seahawks for The Athletic, I think has really had a huge year and been just done an incredible job for them. Along with another guy, Shil Kapadia, is one of my favorite football writers. He covers the Eagles. He used to cover the Seahawks, but he's just simply really, really good at it. And at combining that sort of analytic approach with reporting that I really, and sort of understanding kind of the game that I really like right now. Yeah, so those are just a few that come to mind. I mean, I can keep going. Courtney Cronin, who covers now the Bears for us, I think is one of the better beat reporters in America. Yeah, so she does a really good job too.
Does the NFL make any player decisions based on their Wonderlic score? These questions are coming up fast.
Yeah, we're getting increasingly niche here. Not really, honestly. I hear a lot of behind the scenes of what happens, and so I guess for those who don't know, the Wonderlic score is like this. Well, actually, it's no longer used anymore. So it's been replaced with like kind of psychological testing and whatnot. But part because it was dumb and didn't have any bearing on how prospects translated to the NFL, and also would be leaked and used in pretty gross ways to discuss players, in my opinion. I actually was just on TV talking about it though a little bit this week, with regards to like the draft process and how problematic it still is with regards to race, but talking about football. You hear a lot from teams considering, in-person meetings and trying to gauge football IQ more than anything, which it's not always easy, I guess, and probably is relevant, but is very different from the Wonderlic. I never had a scout or anyone tell me like, oh, we liked him, but then his Wonderlic came in. So.
Okay, this will be our last question, everyone. Thank you for all the questions. And I think this is a good one to end on, actually. What is your best Stephen A story?
Oh my goodness. Let me think. Gosh. I think this isn't like well, first I'll say the first time I meet him, like a lot of people, I was just shocked by how tall he was. So that was kind of, I was like, whoa, damn, like he's really, really tall. And also something people always ask me is like, okay, but like he's not really like that in person. No, he's what you see is what you get. Like I haven't been around him now and remotely and in person done first take. There is no pretense there. He is a consummate entertainer. And then I guess I would say like the most surprising thing to me was like how easily he conceded defeat to me a few times on football topics. In First Take, which is a debate show, which I didn't expect, and I almost didn't know how to react to the first few times it happened. I think Stephen A has, how do you feel about it? He's done a really good job of championing women and women of color at our network and putting them on his show. And that's something that I guess it's not a story, but that's something that I think kind of goes under the radar a bit.
No, that's a great thing for us to know. I like how Stephen A trolls Cowboys fans. Like I live for his Instagram videos with his hat and the whole shtick. It's so funny to me. I do wonder about the yelling all the time. I'm like, that's got to be tough on the vocal cords to constantly be talking and yelling all the time.
I think maybe it's just like you talk so much at the volume, it's kind of like you're an opera singer or something. I don't know. Clearly from my voice, you can tell that I can't right now.
Well, I appreciate you sticking it out with us and answering all of our questions all over the place. Thank you so much, Mina, for joining us, talking about KBO and bat flips. This was so fun.
Thanks so much for talking to me and also reminding me of a story I haven't thought about in a few years. That was really fun.
Thanks. Have a good night. Thanks, everybody. Have
Bye,
a good
guys.
night.